Hi, everyone.
Hello. Yeah, guys, so we're actually ready to start. My name is Elena. I'm co-founder at XFounders, and I'm so happy to have you all with us today for this very interesting panel on decentralization. And first of all, I'd like to give the word to Ethan, who will be our moderator of the panel. Ethan, thank you very much for joining us. And I'm just giving you the word.
Awesome. Can you hear me okay? All good? So, yeah, it's great to be here. I am excited to be a part of this conversation. I'm in Paris, so I was unable to get to you today to be there in person, but it's lovely to get to have this chat with all of us together online. I don't know if there was anything you wanted to share, like any hashtag for social stuff, or if there's anything around questions, if you wanted them to be submitted online somewhere, since we're not going to take them live. If you want to, you can jump in and let me know that. But if not, I'm super excited for us to get started, and we'll get started with just a short introduction from each of our panelists, because I want each of them to get to kind of explain who they are, what they do, and give you a little bit of context as to why everyone is on this call together to talk about this subject.
Cool.
So if we don't have anything else to add, we'll jump in. Maybe Paul, if you want to start us off.
Yeah, guys, glad to see everyone here. I believe this discussion would be insightful for all of us. So my name is Paul, and I'm co-founder of the Let's Rise platform. So we provide the rating for these startups to help them to get the investors and match them with the investors. And then at the same time, I'm the partner of the BDC Consulting. So we provide consultancy and execution services for the Web3 projects during the last more than 6 years.
Awesome. Matthew?
Yeah, so my name is Matt. I work at Avalabs and their business development team. Been at Avalabs for about 1.5 years now. Before that, I worked in traditional finance for about 2 years, and I sort of have a computer science / traditional finance background. But it's really nice to meet you all and happy to be here.
Awesome. And Polina?
Yeah, sure. I work at XDAO, and I've been working for almost 3 years in the world of Web3 and mostly with DAOs. I come from the world of UX and UI, and I paved my way to product management for products in Web3.
Well, that was easy. That was clear. Perfect. I love it. These are all great. Sometimes I have to hold everybody back from, like giving us their 20-minute LinkedIn biography, everything they've done since they were 4 years old, and you guys are just straight to it and super easy. So that makes it lovely. Well, we'll end with Georgios, please. Georgios, tell us about you.
Hi guys. My name is Georgios Kalmpazidis. I am CEO and co-founder Swaps.app. We provide financial and payment infrastructure for Web 2, Web 0.25, and Web 3 startups and company. And we are born in Estonia around 3 years ago. And so happy to be with you guys today.
Awesome. Elena, was there anything you wanted to add before we dive into our questions?
No, I already sent the link to join the Zoom conference to all the participants who you can now see in the conference hall in our hotel in Antalya. So they will be just asking questions in the chat in written, Ethan, as we discussed beforehand.
Excellent. Great. So for everybody who is watching and wants to contribute a question, I'm happy for you to post those in the chat then. We've probably got plenty to talk about just with our fantastic panel, but if there are any pertinent questions there that I can fit in either along the way or at the end, I will try to do that. So feel free to post those questions, and we will get to them when possible. So, well, I guess we will just go ahead and start ourselves off then. And I think the first thing I wanted to do was really kind of to just dive into this idea of what is your definition of Web3? Because I think there's 5 of us, and we're going to have 5 different opinions about what we would call Web3. And I think that's actually really useful, because I think that's very true for builders, that not everybody's building the same thing, not everybody is building in the same space, and not everybody who is super focused maybe on crypto or on DeFi or on Web3 utility or wherever they might happen to be, not necessarily doing what the other people are doing. And so I think that that's really useful for a conversation around decentralization to start off with really our first idea of what it is we believe Web3 is, at least from our perspective or our interests. So who would like to jump in first? Or I can call on you. Matthew?
I can take it. Yeah, I'll take it. So I think I think we have this notion of not distinguishing blockchain technology with like crypto and Web3. And personally, I think there is a difference. I think Web3 is about ownership, decentralization, and democratization, meaning like the people that are using a protocol are the owners of the protocol. They can vote on changes, that sort of thing. So I believe it's funny. I think Ethereum started because Vitalik was playing World of Warcraft and a spell changed within the game that he was not happy about because I think he was playing like a rogue and it was like Blood Siphon or something. And so he was like, all right, these centralized players, they're always kind of bringing me down. And so I need a decentralized kind of settlement layer as well as currency for the internet. And so kind of how Ethereum was created from the mind of Vitalik. But to me, that kind of also mirrors what Web3 is supposed to be. It's about ownership, democratization, and decentralization versus like blockchain technology. It's just technology used for settlements, and it could either be permissionless, it could be decentralized or not. And companies will continue to use blockchain regardless of if it's decentralized or not. And so that, for me, that's kind of the definition of Web3 that I have personally.
Great. Who else would like to jump in? Georgios? Polina?
I'm ready.
Okay. Paul, jump in.
I think that it's important to touch this topic. What is the differentiation between Web3 and Web 3.0? And there are different sources that give different definitions regarding this. And in my point of view, in my understanding, that Web3 is an approach, like the method of storage and disposal of the personal data, where users independently decides what data, in what volume, on what terms, to whom he's ready to provide. So I think that differentiation between Web3 and Web 3.0 is that the Web3 is eliminating intermediaries. So blockchain-based protocol as an alternative of the World Wide Web. At the same time, the Web 3.0 is the continue of the evolution of the web. So it's like the HTTP, HTTPS based protocol as the continuation of the www, in my point of view. I believe that after the XFounders campus, you guys will help all the society to decide what exactly Web3 is.
I actually think that's a great way to sum it up. In a lot of ways, is Web3 can be a lot of things, and it's the builders in a lot of ways who are going to decide what our first use cases really are, and then eventually with adoption, I think it'll be the public that will decide what Web3 really is supposed to be for us. But that's great. Thanks, Paul. Next.
I think I'm really interested in the idea that there's difference between Web3 and Web 3.0. I never thought about it. It's really cool. And I think I have the same feel of this idea. When I was little, when someone explained to me Web 2, I always felt like there was a layer around the globe that connected some parts of it easier. So it like break through time and space. But it's like another layer on top of it, which could break some restrictions that people have nowadays with when they cannot access assets in banks, or where they cannot access some services. And now with an extra layer of Web3 on top of everything that we have now, they have some additional tools to live their life. If they don't have a passport, there's still tons of lending protocols that they could work with and they can have access to. And that gives some extreme opportunities for some people that didn't get it at the first place. So That's what Web 3.0 to me.
Great. Georgios?
Well, my turn, yeah. So, in my point of view, Web3, first of all, is the terms that describe that evolution of internet from Web 0 Web 2.0 to Web 3. And the big difference for me is the value of the difference for the value between Web 2 and Web 3. In the Web 2, all the user information belongs to centralized company, and in Web 3, all the information belongs to user himself, and basically he decide how to share this information with third party. In this scenario, we are in the situation when the central company completely changed the model how to make more money on ads, etc. And the product, the real value product belongs to user, not to the company. That's my point, what is Web 3 and Web 2.
That's great, and what I love is we definitely had four very different, I think, views on what this could be. I think it really pulls back to the idea that there are different areas that Web3 is addressing. We have everything that's around finance, which makes that it can be a very crypto conversation, whether it's about payments, whether it's about cross-border remittance, whatever stores of value, whatever that might be, that we're still playing in the crypto side of the pond. And I also think that when we start looking then at Web3 as that, as Georgios, you just mentioned, with user data, with people actually finally having control, so that now there's maybe a direct relationship between brands and content creators or others and their communities. Because instead of having platforms that are in between, like a YouTube or an Insta or Substack or whatever, now we're going to have these one-to-one relationships. I think there's all kinds of ways to look at it. We have the digital art side, not necessarily the monkey JPEGs on that side with the PFPs, but also we have digital art simply as an asset class that is very similar to historical art markets, and that while all these things are potentially tied to crypto because they're tokenized, they aren't really about crypto anymore. A rewards and loyalty program for an airline is not about crypto just because it's NFTs. It's just tokenized, and I think that when we look at digital twins for fashion or luxury or other companies where it's the digital copy of a physical good, the same thing. We have to have the crypto side to tokenize it, but in the end of the day, nobody needs to necessarily care about the fact that it's crypto or blockchain or anything else. And so that leads us to a whole bunch of, that opens up a huge can of worms of all the things that we can get into, because it brings us to this decentralization topic. And to the extent that theoretically, a lot of what the blockchain was meant to be decentralized. But when we start looking at some of these finance or corporate brand uses around it, we see mixed models. We definitely see a Web 2.5 where a lot of the platforms that are going to plug Web 3 in, they're still going to stay fairly centralized, but they're going to add a Web 3 layer. Then we see stuff that's purely Web3, whether it's like on the DAO side, when we talk about governance with communities that we'll get to with Polina, when we talk about a lot of the DeFi side of the finance. So I think one of the things we can talk about is the different degrees of decentralization. We like to make it all about all 100% decentralized. And I don't think that's probably real in most use cases of what we'll see. We'll see more decentralized than what we have today without it necessarily always being completely. But let's talk about that. We've got a couple different decentralizations. We have the infrastructure decentralization, where all of the information and even the computers processing all of that data are decentralized. We also have the fact that teams are now completely decentralized, more or less, post-COVID, the remote work world we live in, all kinds of things. We have that kind of distributed and more decentralized approach to a lot of this. And we also even have decentralized governance, where if an organization is running itself through some kind of a DAO or tokenized model where people have an input on how it is run and how it moves forward, we've got that. So I think we can take each of those in turn and talk about it. So let's maybe start with that first one. Why does infrastructure decentralization matter? Who wants to talk about the tech side? Why do we need to decentralize the data and the servers and the tech?
I guess I can hop right in again, if that's cool. So for me, it matters to be just censorship resistant. So you have to decentralize nodes, RPCs, etc. And so when people are under times of chaos and stress, they can continue self-custody, continue to make transactions, continue to permissionlessly use on-chain protocols, that sort of thing. And so I think there's going to be a pretty big shift in the next 2 to 5 years in which every piece of infrastructure has to be decentralized. And to be completely frank, I think like law officials are even going to come after like L2s, for instance, with like decentralized sequencers, like bridges, they're constantly centralized. RPCs, if you can't connect to the chain, how are you going to use a blockchain? That sort of thing. And so who was it? It was 2 weeks ago that Tornado Cash dev was arrested essentially for creating Tornado Cash. And I think kind of crazy, to be completely honest, that in terms of someone get arrested just for having a privacy protocol. And so I think in the not so distant future, it is really going to pressure teams into being very conscientious about what degree of decentralization they have in terms of every piece of infrastructure. And I think it will continue to be sort of magnified. We've seen it personally. And I think, like I mentioned, regarding bridges, those are considered centralized by government entities. Regarding decentralized sequencers right now, if they're essentially like one of ones, basically what Optimism has, or fraud proofs with Arbitrum, if only certain entities can prove what really happens in terms of state transitions on the optimistic rollup. I think that's not considered decentralized enough. And so in my opinion, decentralization truly matters in terms of like times of chaos. We saw within like Afghanistan, for instance, when the Taliban invaded, those with access to Bitcoin were those that retained their wealth and their financial freedom versus those with money in the banks, unfortunately, could not withdraw. And so I think that's kind of my viewpoint, in which decentralization kind of hits you in the face when it's not truly decentralized at some point in time. And it's generally that's under times of chaos. So
who else would like to jump in on infrastructure decentralization?
Maybe I can just some overview, as I think that it's really hard to imagine a data privacy storage without decentralization. So it's really matter. But if product could solve user problems without decentralization, so think twice, do you really should to use this technology? Otherwise, you're wasting your resources and the reputation. But and for sure, there are some products which need decentralization technologies more than other, but at the privacy data, I think so that we must use it.
Georgios, Polina, thoughts?
Well, I can add something. So basically, what I think is why it's matter, it's because of the trust. It's very important because when the project use decentralized infrastructure, it's way more trust from the users, because everything gets transparent. For that reason, it's really matter. Then you have the ownership and the control under asset. It's very important, same as in smart contract or NFT or any other token. And well, basically it's innovations. When you have something innovation, you open the gateway for other same level of the entrepreneur who wants to grow technology on the same level with you. And well, I think it's enough. Many other subjects was touched by the other guys.
I actually believe that privacy is exactly the thing that could lead to it being very important, while innovation should not be enough. As innovation for innovation is something that happens all over the place, and decentralization just for the sake of decentralization is not something that we need to do. But as we all agree, I think, is that with privacy and with the technical side of storing the information about the users, or just generally about everything, the information on the project, it is really important to have this decentralization. Good thing is people are already sick and tired enough of different companies leaking their data and not storing it correctly and selling it. So I think that is something that is valued by users, and that's why we are moving in that direction, as we have an actual tendency of people wanting it.
I think that idea of privacy definitely seems to underline whether or not something in Web3 needs to be decentralized. Also on the finance side, I think we need to be careful that if we are basing financial systems, or at least if we're putting our capital there in order to make it safe because we want to take it away from the fiat world, then yeah, probably having that be 100% decentralized and not kind of decentralized makes a lot of sense. On the privacy side, very much at least making sure that there's nobody who can have control of that data or inappropriately access it. That makes a lot of sense too. But I would like to kind of go into this idea a little bit more of it seems like we're definitely heavy on the side of finance and privacy, but there's a lot of Web3 that has nothing to do with finance and potentially our private information, all the things around, again, where corporates and brands are at with a lot of what they're building, a lot of what Web3 startups are building for things around in-game video game assets, everything related to the music industry, rewards and loyalty programs, everything related to digital twins, everything in the digital collectible space, and that is all very much Web3 as well. It doesn't seem to be necessarily where our panelists are focused on, so I don't want to push them too far down that road, but I do want to explore the idea of in your thoughts. There are certain maybe Web3 startup ideas that need to be decentralized more or less than others. If you have any feedback on that, or if you have more thoughts around going down that road, I'm very interested to hear those. I think it's useful for the group of, and in this context of an accelerator, incubator kind of program, helping people explore their idea, scale that up, figure out product market fit, work on building a company. I'm curious to know in the audience, and if you want to post in the chat, what you're working on, because I do think it's interesting, this idea of decentralization versus potentially, again, this Web 2.5 idea. Maybe not everybody wants to consider that where we're going in Web 3, but I do think that's still the case. So thoughts, any of you, or pushback, or your opinions on this idea?
So it's funny. I'm a gamer at heart. I think I've been gaming since I was like 3 or 4 years old, and it's interesting to me in terms of like decentralized video gaming, because I do think users, like the players who are spending the most hours in the game, should be able to decide on changes for that game, as well as owning their like in-game assets. I always go back to Counter-Strike because I played way too many hours of Counter-Strike in terms of like the very valuable knife skins, AK-47 skins, a few other in-game weapon skins, and being able to own that and I guess carry it over, trade it, that sort of thing, I think is super important. I was actually thinking about this in terms of like what I would want if I was a player and there was a cheater or someone like botting to get scarce in-game assets, something like that. If I think that they should continue to be able to play just because that is like a loophole they found within the game, or if I think a centralized entity should ban them, or if it should be decentralized and voted on or something like that. And it is an interesting kind of thought process to think about what truly should be allowed and not allowed, and then who should decide that within video games, just because I played RuneScape and World of Warcraft, and the botting in those two games in terms of like some of the assets, it's very bad. But a lot of the time, the botters will continue to bot and just like create continually new accounts. And they'll use like a VPN, the IP ban them, that sort of thing. And so it is hard to truly ban cheating and botting in games, and I don't know how it should be handled. I mean, personally, I think the anti-cheat and bot engines within games just should probably improve, but would be curious to hear like other people's opinions about how that should be handled if someone is found to be botting or cheating. So.
Other thoughts? Anyone?
So if we are talking regarding where to use Web3 or not to use, or to use Web 2.5, I think that important question we should answer is the decentralization or Web3 technology is your feature or the tool? And some industries are, and what critical problems are solving. So for example, Web3 and decentralization, blockchain is much more important for such projects like the which solve the problems at the security, personal data, asset management, cost reduction by eliminating the intermediate parties. So investing, trading, and IP protection, for example, is more critical than games, for example, or loyalty programs, in my point of view. And I'm back where I was started. So think twice, do you really need to use any kind of the blockchain and decentralization? Probably your product could live without it. Unfortunately, your valuation and multiplication in the investment side would be lower, I think so, but it's better to build a great product.
Yeah, really. I started off working with a financial tool, and the first thing that I knew about Web3 was about finance and how DeFi works. And only like several months into the job, I found out about guilds and about gaming and about everything inside. And I didn't believe it the first time I heard it. I felt like it felt like two different worlds collapsed together. And when I started to connect the dots, the thing that I like about where I like the decentralization, where I think worked a cool thing, is for NFTs and for artists. I've been an artist my whole life. I started using artificial intelligence the moment it came out. I've started to do thousands. I think I started to do thousands more works since the beginning of it. The amount of productivity that I have right now is way higher than it used to be, but it's not exactly the work of an artist as it used to be. So I like the turn of events of NFTs and marketplaces that we have at the moment, because I think it will refocus the skill from refocus the users from the skill to the person behind the art, to the messages, to the to the process of creation, and a lot of things that I think is very cool. Our director in our company, he's a genius artist, and he has a project where the holders of his art can decide on the future of his works and have an access to different galleries all over the world, just because they're holders of these NFTs. And that's something that gives all of that a new meaning, a breath of fresh air, because just a skill is not something that people liked even in medieval times. And now we have an opportunity to see new versions of how message is being read by those who look at the art.
No, that's great. The I love that point, Paul, that we talked about the decentralization the feature or the tool. I think that's really an interesting way to approach this conversation is, if we're talking about art or we're talking about video games or whatever it is that we're talking about, is decentralization the point, or is it just the thing that we're using to accomplish what it is we needed to accomplish? And so I think that that's really useful to look at it these ways. I would just wanted to mention, so it's not the chat in Zoom. If you want to leave a question, that's not enabled. We're using the Q&A, so feel free to put your messages there. And for any of the panelists, if you see there's two things posted there, you're welcome to type an answer to those if there's something that really calls out to you. If people post more things, otherwise I will try and answer those if it feels like we fit it in with the rest of our questions as well. But feel free, if you're in the audience and you want to type a Q&A in there, that would be great. So I think maybe this brings us back then, if we're looking at why does infrastructure decentralization matter, or why does decentralization matter in these other places, this idea of it being either is it the future or is it the tool, then who really cares about decentralization? Who's the person pushing that idea? Is it the developers? Is it the users? Or is it even potentially the investors? I think two of you chimed in on this question whenever we were doing our pre-panel kind of prep. So I'm not sure what your thoughts are on this, but for me, there also seems to be, this is coming from different places depending on the particular model or business, not necessarily business model, but the problem that we're solving with decentralization. Is it the users that are asking for it? Is it the developers that want to decentralize everything just because they believe that's the way it should be done? Or is it even investors that are looking at ways to have different models, and so they're wanting to invest into those? What are your thoughts about who's really pushing the decentralization idea?
Let me start, Matthew. So as I see today, so developers push everything. And one of the problem why we are on the bearish market today, in my point of view, is that developers create products for developers. So it's too techy, and it's a huge blocker for the mass adoption, because daily task which the final customer want to solve is really hard to solve using the blockchain and decentralization, because the final customer do not understand the use cases, how he can really do this instead of the investments, for example. So, and in my point of view, so to push all of this, the developers should think outside the box and what types of the problems they really could solve for the final customer, not for the developer. And the second one is the user experience. As long Web3 products would be different from Web2 products, as long the mass adoption is later, the mass adoption will come. So I believe that if MetaMask would be such simple as the Revolut, the mass adoption would be much more closer than right now. But for sure, all of the parties of the industry, users, developers, and investors help it to grow. Investors love Web3 in my point of view, because the multiplicators are higher and the returning of the investors are shorter. Users use the Web3 and blockchain technology for today, mostly regarding the investments, because it's easier to invest and also to return money in the short period. And developers, I think they just love these principles of decentralization, but sometimes they do not care of the final customers.
I agree with it to such extent, Scott. Every time I think about MetaMask, and every time I think about UX in Web3, I think that it was not made for users. That's a battle I fight every day. And the thing is, still, we have so many complicated concepts in Web3, and we still have so many jargon existing that is sometimes irreplaceable, and sometimes it's needed to just bring in this new level, this new language for users. So where we had Logan, we have Connect, or even just like that, or Launch app that everyone in Web3 seemed to know, but my grandma wouldn't. And there are a lot of things that right now is not done for user. And I feel like developers usually push it. But it turned out that in a lot of cases, it does work. It just needs to be reworked after that, because the idea behind is usually something that is definitely needed. It's just about the way it's done. It's usually not exactly comprehensible for users. So I believe that that's really good that developers do move it forward. They just need to attract some funds and then bringing some user experience designers who will fix the things that they did wrong. But I also had an insight of investors being the ones who bring the decentralization into modern projects. As one of the most used features on our platform, we're DAO tooling, and people come to our platform for different features, not just to create their own organization. The most used feature as turned out to be crowdfunding. And that's where we realized that was the initiative of investors. So what they wanted to do is they wanted to have transparent investment activity and raising of funds, and transparent dividend distribution modules and vesting modules and everything that they have on their side. But they wanted to bring this further on. They wanted to bring this decentralization into the financial models of startups that they were investing to, and that's something that we didn't see coming. And it turned out that our platform was useful to them. But it's also something that does happen. Investors do bring some decentralization into startups, as in the beginning it's important to them, but further on it's something that startups do for the user. So yeah, it happens in many different ways.
Guys, I also want to mention something that who really as well cares about decentralization is government, regulators, and policymaker. And it's like very tricky model to be always between innovations and decentralizations, and to protect the normal people, because it's also connected, related with investors. We need a rule on the market to be in the legal, and that's why I think it's very important to mention about regulators. Well, and about investors, it's also, I think it's two different group. The strongest one, of course, they focus for blockchain products for the long-term investment, and it's also other one is more who running for the hype, and it's another group of investors. So, and of course the developers, well, they love to do something with which, you know how to say, that's something that's never end. And decentralization it's about this. Thanks.
Matthew, did you want to add anything to that part?
Yeah, I guess really quickly, I guess I'll add that generally I view decentralization in terms of like who cares about it. There's an overarching theme, and for me, it's generally safety. And so investors care that something is decentralized, like he was saying, because regulators come in and they might view something as a security, but if something is properly decentralized, then technically it might not pass the Howey test. Well, the Howey test is a little different, but if something is decentralized, then it might not be viewed as security. Versus users, generally, I think they don't care quite as much about decentralization until it matters, whether that's access to a critical multi-sig for a protocol, critical contracts, whether that is their local government going through hyperinflation and they have to have like a life raft somewhere else, that sort of thing. And then I think that kind of goes and transitions to developers as well, because developers want to develop somewhere where they believe that it has a long-term focus and will be relatively lindy in nature and able to weather through various large-scale events that are outside of a protocol's own control. And so I think decentralization really adds that layer of safety, in which if something is properly decentralized, it's just much harder to take control of, exploit, etc. And developers like that because then where they build, it'll continue to weather the long-term storm, whatever happens through that. And so that's kind of my own opinion, in which they all three care about decentralization. And the overarching theme is like safety is what decentralization gives, and users might care least until it truly matters to them. But at that point in time, it is very important to users. So.
No, I think that's a great point to bring up, that a lot of people don't care about the protective side that decentralization could bring to their financial assets or to anything until maybe they could have used it. But I think there's an interesting point too that it can go the other way, which is a lot of the people who have really gotten on the NFT and crypto boat and are all like, decentralization matters, down with the man, we're anti-establishment, blah, blah, blah. And as soon as somebody steals one of their NFTs or they don't remember their seed phrase to their wallet, they forget that there is no customer service in crypto. And I think that's an extremely important point, that we can be all about decentralization, but it can also turn around and bite you in the ass. So we do have to realize that there are two sides to this thing. There is a huge benefit that can come from it, but in accepting those benefits, we also have to accept the fact that there is also a lot of value from centralized organizations in being able to provide a support or protective side around it when they're doing it right. So I think but that is very important. I think a lot of people don't care about decentralization because they don't see how, well, I'm never going to get kicked off. I'm never going to get deplatformed off YouTube, or the bank's never going to close my account. And then all of a sudden that happens and oh gosh, that would have been good to maybe have something else. So I think that's a super valid and useful point. I just realized as well that in case anybody is wondering who the hell I am, I didn't introduce myself. So just the very quick version of that. And thanks, Paul, for recommending them to reach out so I could join you on this conversation. My name's Ethan Pierce. I'm an American. I've been living in France for 20 years. Built a bunch of digital marketing and e-commerce companies between the US, France, and Singapore. Then I was a VC for a number of years. Today I have two things: Borderless Ventures, which is my investment activity. I'm working with startups primarily in Europe through syndicated investments, actually through Estonia. I think, Georgios, you said you've moved there now. So that's part of that, but then also just helping companies scale up between Southeast Asia, Europe, and the US. And then the CryptoAssets Institute, where I help brands and funds deal with issues related to the Web3 economy. That puts me on a lot of stages. I'm one of the MCs for Web Summit, for example, for their fintech stage, or for 80 other things during the year. I'm pretty much always on a stage. And that gets me to be with all kinds of cool people like you. So that's why I do this. If you're ever in Paris, I'm one of the co-founders of the NFT Factory, which is, technically it is the headquarters of France's Web3 ecosystem. Most people don't realize how much Web3 is French. But our 128 co-founders are Ledger and Sorare and The Sandbox and Artifact and Dogami and a whole bunch of other things. It's also happens to be the largest physical art gallery for digital art. It's 400 square meters, 75 screens. Super cool place. If you find yourself in Paris, reach out to me, and happy to meet you there for a coffee. Anyways, that's a little bit of context as to why I'm joining on this conversation with you. I work a lot more on the Web3 side. That's maybe less DeFi, decentralized, and more with brands and corporates, which is why I've been throwing in some of those points. But I think it's really great to have this balanced conversation, because depending on the use case, depending on the startup, depending on the investor, depending on the user, the decentralization and what piece of Web3 we're talking about is completely appropriate or different. And so I think that's really a very important thing to be looking at. So let's move then maybe into the next idea, just because I think this is also really useful for teams that are building in the space, which is, well, we talk about decentralized tech. We can also talk about the fact that teams now have become very decentralized, or at least distributed and remote. Maybe not exactly down the same path as true decentralization, but this is also something that incredibly affects startups building things, because they no longer necessarily need to be close to the action. You don't have to be in San Francisco. You don't have to be in New York or London or even Paris in order to potentially raise funds, hire that good developer, or other things. So thoughts about that for you, if your teams are remote, or if what your thoughts are about building decentralized apps, but because you're leveraging decentralized people. Anyone?
Yeah, I think right now we have so many opportunities to be decentralized as teams. In our team, we have an opportunity to be online. We don't have any restrictions on when we're supposed to be in the office. However, we do have an office, which is a great bonus. It's not like online, which is a must. We have an office and we can go there. And I think it works extremely great when you don't have a huge team. When we're having productive periods where we're working hard and we don't have a big team and we have our offices, we're there and we're doing a great job because we're all there very connected, and it'll take us like maybe 2 to 3 months. We'll do our job, we'll do it good, and after that we'll continue on with the different types of projects that we have, like maybe something that we don't work all together. For example, right now we're releasing a new platform, and it's been an intense time, and we've been all working together in the office, and it did benefit us to be all together. But we still have a lot of people who are just not who cannot do that for different reasons. They live in different countries. They're uncomfortable with working with different people in the same space. They would like to have their space, and they wouldn't even, for example, there are different types of people, and someone cannot go on calls. That's not something that they can do. So you have to have different types of system where you can manage all together, and you can contact, and you can have a strong connection where you understand everything that this person is doing, or maybe just enough parts of this person is doing. You don't have to know everything that everyone is doing. But that's really important, because we managed to do all of that and we didn't have any troubles. And that was, I think, something new to everyone when the COVID started. I think that for small startups, for small teams, it is very beneficial to have a space, but it is not a must. It also, I think it benefits in our case that our office is in Bali. I mean, it's like there can be an office somewhere in a very colder place than our office, and we're just having so much fun just going there.
No, that's great. I think there's a I don't think it's necessarily a case now of not wanting or having it, because I think some people much prefer being able to go to an office and work and get things done, and the social side of that and whatever. So there's a lot of personality differences between how people want to work. A lot of devs work kind of in their own focus, in their tunnel. You know, they want to be quiet, they want their music on, they want to focus, they don't want distractions. So I think it depends on who you are and how you work and those kind of things. I think it's interesting that we no longer are required to have those, but it's really good, like you pointed out, that we don't just get rid of them, because maybe that's something that can actually also be a very good tool for the company to help build, is to have a place for everybody to come to. Anyone else? Thoughts about
also
remote
security?
work?
Also security, it's very related subject for decentralized company, because when you deal with decentralized information, it's sometimes extremely important to protect your team, and maybe to protect the private information from the public as well. It's access for the global pool of talent, if your business is able to scale worldwide, which is good. Also culture, different coverage, the time zone, in order to support your business for your users. And by the way, we also have office in Bali and in Tallinn, in Yerevan, and it's helped to cover all the time zone. Very, very cool. Thank you.
I think it's a telling sign for remote work that we used to have to build offices where the people were in order to get them as employees, and now we're building them in Bali. So I think that says a lot about how this is working, which is a good thing. I don't know if Matt or Paul, you had anything you want to add to that. If not, we can move to the next thing. Okay. Well, we did have a question here that I wanted to bounce back to whenever we talked about the gaming thing. Matt brought that up, but I think this question could apply to others. Plus, maybe just useful to have a generalized opinion, since we're talking about decentralization, about the whole topic of WorldCoin. and what that means. So anybody have feelings or thoughts about WorldCoin in general? But also we have a question here, which was, would a centralized, or not centralized, but would a validated digital identity potentially help to avoid cheaters being able to recreate accounts and into things? But the general, we can just talk about WorldCoin as a general concept as well.
Honestly, that's an interesting one, because I think what WorldCoin is doing, if it were to be successful, it could really change the world. I think it's a little bit dystopian in nature, and they need to be they need to be super safe about storing that data in everyone's retinas, etc. But not having to have official documentation for people to almost semi KYC or be able to access certain dApps, whether they're DeFi, gaming, etc., I think is a super important concept, just because Web3, it really it's all about like financial enablement and just enablement in general, regardless of where you live. So if someone lives in emerging markets country where they might not have great access to a bank account or good documentation, that sort of thing, they can still have access to permissionless blockchain protocols. And so in this case, I think WorldCoin actually could be a decent solution to cheaters within video games, for instance. And so they wouldn't have a way of creating another account, because they would have had to use WorldCoin in their own retina, in which unless someone else registers using someone else's like retina or something, I don't think it would be possible to create a new account. And so, yeah, this is actually a good use case for WorldCoin.
Anyone have other thoughts about WorldCoin? I'm always curious to hear what the crypto crowd, especially the more dev crowd, thinks of this, because we can be so militant about giving up any information for anything, and yet they'll line up 100 deep at a conference to scan their eyeball, or to a couple people who I've just seen be super maxi about anti-establishment causes, and they're the ones that actually are now they've got a WorldCoin ball in their office so they can make $20 an eye, scanning people. I find it a very curious conversation to believe in decentralization and to be wanting to trust something like WorldCoin, which could not be more centralized in terms of the people behind it. We're talking the elite of Silicon Valley venture capital and Y Combinator and all these kind of things, which I personally have no issue with and love, but that is not the decentralized finance world by any means. No, it's okay. Wanted to see if there's any more to talk about on that one. Well, I think our last thing we're going to talk about here before we close out, because I wanted to bring it up a little bit because we have Polina coming in from the DAO side, but also I do this idea of, we talk about decentralized infrastructure, we talk about decentralized maybe team, but I also think decentralized governance is also something that can come into play. And again, we are not necessarily, I think part of the problem with this word decentralized is we make it a zero-sum kind of game. It's black or white. Things are either 100% decentralized or they are completely centralized. And I really think it's about being more decentralized than our current options in many of the use cases. For my opinion, I feel like the governance question is like that as well. It doesn't have to be completely governance by the crowd, because if you're building a company, that will never work. If you've ever built companies, committees do not build companies. Entrepreneurs do, and teams that are focused and really. Sometimes you just have to make decisions, and not everybody's going to like those. But I love the idea of, once things are moving, that you have the input of people to make sure that things go in the right direction, that they serve the community, that they stay rooted in the kind of the ideas of why something was built. Pauline, what are your thoughts on decentralized governments? Thought about building things in public, about community engagement in government, or maybe even investor relations, having that all be more decentralized?
Sure thing. Well, thank you for making my name sound very French, Pauline. I like it. And second of all, when so many cases, my friends who are building their companies can come to me and say, "Hey, I know you're working in the DAO field, and it's really trendy, it's so cool. Do you think I should build a DAO for my company? And in 90% of cases, I say no. You don't need to do that. It's not something that you need for your startup. But still, it's just another field, because we have 25,000 plus DAOs created on our platform, and we have an extremely nice evidence of that is very useful in a lot of cases. The thing that is mostly used is for investment activity. They create a DAO for investment activity, for a safe way to access their funds, their assets, by the core team, or by investors if they have any governance rights. So what happens there is usually people use DAOs as a bank account, a joint bank account, where the core members have an access to it, but all the decision making is made via consensus. But it's not. It doesn't even have to be that way. You can still have a manager who will execute all the transactions, who will finalize the decisions. If you have a big team and you want to have someone who represents the actual intention of your company, like a CEO, who would make all the finalized decisions. You can do all of that with DAOs. It doesn't mean that it have to be decentralized to the point. It's about the model that works for your company. For example, if you have a small core team, if you have 3 founders who need to have all the decision making, and if the funds are brought by the core team, like a friends and family DAO, for example, like some sort of investment fund, they all have access to the money. They all have decision making rights, and they don't have as much people so that it would be troublesome for them to collect their opinions on some major decisions. That's the case where it could actually really work. Another case where you have your friend who's a trader, and he's a good trader. You don't know anything about it. You have some funds and you want to invest in him, and you want to like go ahead and have this thing going on together. You can create a DAO for it to be transparent and safe, but for for your friend to have the security of you not pulling out your funds out of him at some point where he doesn't expect it to happen. So you have some sort of connection with him. You decided on what are the terms of your investment into him, and he's trading and you're taking back your funds, how you will split the profits. You decide on it. You can write down all the rules of how your relationship works, and it can be automated to a very great point. So you can still do it on paper. You should still do it on paper. You should still do a SAFT, but it can still be automated. So yeah, there are different ways for startups to be decentralized. I believe that there is first thing, it's a governance system. And the most important thing is you don't have to bring the investment activity into it. It doesn't mean that investors are supposed to have governance rights, and these are two different systems. You can combine those. You can give the investors the governance rights, but that's not exactly how it's not a must. Second thing is the asset management and the decision making about the money, on what are you doing with this money. If you have a small team, it's a governance system where you decide on your asset management, and it all works fine as a joint bank account. And the third layer is where you have a community, where you have actual people who are following through and who want to have a say in the way you are developing as a project. And that's when the community token works, or just your token as a project. If these people buy your token, or you give out this token as a reward, that's a good place to start the governance system, where people who own this token have an opportunity to create proposals and to vote in these proposals, to have their opinion on chain, to have their opinion visible, to have access to some information about your startup, or of how you're working, of what are the odds of this project going this way or that way. And it doesn't have to be instantaneously executable votings on blockchain. It just has to be there for them to have access to it via their token. That's the way to connect with the community. So yeah, I believe that there are different levels, and you don't have to use any of them. Actually, some startups work without any of this decentralization. but you have these opportunities. Advice you to do.
Well, that was fantastic. That was much more detailed than I expected, and that was super useful. I love when I learn things on panels, and thank you. Does anybody else have anything they want to add to the governance question? If not, we are at the end of our time, but I'm happy if the other three of you have anything you would like to add on governance for decentralized things. Anything? Well, in that case, I would say, even though we can't hear you in the room there, please give a round of applause for my wonderful rockstar panelists. Thank them for taking their time to be with you. And I guess we will jump back. Elena, if you have anything you'd like to say to close us out, but thank you to all of the panelists for contributing.
Yeah, exactly. That's exactly what I wanted to say, Ethan. Thank you so much, guys, to each and every of you. I think it was very insightful for our participants because all of them are building something great, something potentially revolutionary in the market. So I'm sure it was very useful for them to hear this, let's say, high-level perspective, but also to view the problem from very different angles. And I think something really practical that they will extract from the panel is that they should really decide for themselves whether to decentralize or not, and whether decentralization is a tool for them or a feature. So thank you so much, and we keep in touch and probably see each other sometime soon.
Ciao.
Thank you, guys.
Ciao.
Thank you so much. Bye.